Richard Newton is a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General. Welcome to our program, General Newton.
Daniel, good to be back with you.
Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. U.S. proposal on a ceasefire on the ground, in the air and at sea. Meanwhile, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin also has reacted to this proposal. He says that he agrees with this initiative, but he is also imposing his own terms. What is your reaction? How can you assess the reaction of Vladimir Putin to this initiative of a ceasefire plan from Ukraine and the United States?
Well, first off, it's been quite a tumultuous period of diplomacy over the last several days since February 28th of that time in the Oval Office with President Zelensky and President Trump. But here we are now, now that President Zelensky and President Trump have both agreed to significant terms for a 30-day ceasefire that will set up, hopefully, peace negotiations thereafter. I think what President Zelensky has agreed to is significant. I think it's one that is great resolve on his part, and frankly, great resolve on President Trump's part. Now the ball is in Putin and Russia's court. However, I do not anticipate at all Putin or Russia cooperating through ceasefire negotiations or permanent, peace agreement negotiations. But at least we've got now an opportunity for further discussions. And I think you're going to see from Putin, he will be very difficult and somewhat of an untrustworthy adversary in these negotiations. But at least I think we're on the cusp, Daniel, of beginning some discussions.
Do you expect Vladimir Putin to finally agree with this ceasefire proposal in the nearest future if enough pressure is being put on Russia and Kremlin?
I would not anticipate it anytime soon because I see Russia on the offense, especially trying to dislodge Ukrainian forces who unprecedentedly took the Kursk region, the first time that Russia actually has been invaded and territory taken away from Russia back in August of 2024. That was a brilliant move on President Zelensky and Ukrainians' part. But nonetheless, Putin is on the offensive trying to dislodge Ukrainian forces as well as trying to gain as much positions they possibly can on that 600-mile front in the eastern part of Ukraine before he enters into an agreement to actually have a 30-day ceasefire. I would also remind our viewers, and you know this is better than I do, that since that negotiation or agreement for a ceasefire negotiation framework between President Trump and President Zelensky, that Russia has attacked Ukraine, Kyiv, and other cities, 250 plus drone attacks, as well as several ballistic missile attacks. So I think you're going to see Putin on the offensive here as long as he can in order to try to put him into the best position for those at least those 30-day ceasefire negotiations.
Do you see these air attacks on Ukraine after the beginning of negotiations between Ukraine, the United States, and Russia as an intimidation, as an insult from Vladimir Putin to Donald Trump?
I think, let me back up. I don't think Putin has stopped intimidating Ukraine or the West since he invaded back on February 24th of 2022. And fast forward to today, he'll take every tool out of his war chest, but also diplomatically to try to intimidate President Trump and perhaps a unified front now between not only the United States and Ukraine, but also Europe. But Trump is going to stand his ground. He's going to make it a very tough, he'll maintain very tough positions in negotiating with Putin. They sound nice, if you will, across the ocean in terms of their pronouncements of the last couple days. But I think you're going to find President Trump maintaining a very tough stance from a military standpoint, sure, because he's now, again, providing Ukraine with minute-by-minute intelligence, but also has now continued with U.S. providing military support. We still have over $3 billion, Daniel, of military capabilities in the pipeline that we could provide Ukraine. I would also offer up that President Trump did away with the exemptions for European Union as well as European nations that allowed them to have oil and gas sales between themselves and Russia. They're no longer permitted to do that. My point being is, I think the biggest card that Trump has to play is the economic card, where now European Union and those European nations can no longer, from a sanction standpoint or an exemption to those sanctions, be able to do oil and gas deals with Putin and Russia. That will hurt Putin financially, and Trump knows that.
So you're confident that Vladimir Putin will try to gain as much as possible, as much Ukrainian land as possible before he enters negotiations seriously?
I absolutely agree with that. And again, it goes back, and you and I talked about this last time. We cannot trust Putin. And therefore, the only thing Putin will understand as the attacker of Ukraine, but also the bully that we know him to be, is the only thing he understands is strength. And the only thing he understands is a united front between the United States, Ukraine, and the rest of Europe. That's what's really been remarkable since that tumultuous meeting in the Oval Office on February 28th to where we are right now. I see a much more unified position between the United States and Ukraine, as well as with Europe. Putin will understand that. But I think the thing that's really going to impact him and deter him or get him to the negotiating table, at least to be in the ceasefire negotiations at the beginning, are really the economic and financial challenges that his country is going to face in the coming months and perhaps even over a year or two, faced with a strong U.S. position financially and economically vis-a-vis sanctioning Putin and Russia, especially with his oil and gas sales.
From your perspective, do you see this recent reaction, TV address from Vladimir Putin to Trump reacting to this proposal as a no to this proposal, or do you see this as a rejection of Trump's proposal?
I see it as perhaps more on the rejection side. However, it's more to be determined. I think what Putin is trying to do is he's just trying to stall for a better position on the battlefield. Earlier this week, Daniel, we didn't see a Putin in a business suit, but we saw him in military fatigues. We saw him. That is sending a message to the rest of the world. He also, for the first time, visited the front lines, Russia's front lines in the Kursk region, and met with his theater commander. So he's trying to also own the optics of how he is to be viewed, not only internally in Russia, but externally. And so even something as maybe seen as simple as him being in military fatigues, I think would warrant us to consider him to be even a more hardened position, certainly at the outset as he enters into or contemplates his next steps in these 30-day ceasefire negotiations.
You just mentioned about Vladimir Putin wearing a military uniform. Do you see this as a message that he will continue this war despite all the odds?
I think given every opportunity, he will try to continue the war as long as it suits his best interests. But however, again, you know this better than I do. There have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of soldiers and certainly innocent Ukrainian civilians, but soldiers on both sides who've been killed in action and wounded. And of course, the atrocities that have been levied against Ukrainian civilians, innocent Ukrainian citizens. These are war criminal acts. And so Putin putting on this military uniform does not give him any credibility at all. He's a war criminal, but I do believe that he will strive to put the Russian military in the best possible position up until at the point where he will, I think, eventually agree to ceasefire negotiations and a ceasefire itself. But he's trying to keep Russian military on the offense as Ukraine digs in on the defense.
So you're confident that Vladimir Putin has no other choice but to agree with ceasefire proposal today or in the nearest future?
I think eventually he will, but it's going to take a continued strong position between President Trump and President Zelensky, as well as with European allies. President Trump met with the NATO Security General yesterday in the Oval Office, and they had a very clear message to not only our European allies, but to Putin, that there is very little daylight between the United States and NATO. That's significant. We need to keep that going. We need to keep that thought moving forward because, Daniel, once ceasefire negotiations or long-term, they're what I would call a phase two, long-term peace negotiations, they're going to get bumpy. Diplomacy is messy. There's nothing linear about it. And it's less about the process, but more about the results. And so I think that you're going to need to see a play for U.S. providing long-term commitment to, yes, military capabilities, intelligence support, but also economic sanctions against Russia that the United States is leading. And I think right now President Trump is leading very effectively. But that will need to continue through the weeks and the months and even into the next year or two to give those long-term security guarantees for President Zelensky and for Ukraine so that Russia never ever is able or would even contemplate invading Ukraine or any other Western country again.
From your perspective, for how long could this process of negotiations be in the place, be active? For how long, how much would take it to negotiate a ceasefire? How many months or even years?
I think for the immediate 30-day ceasefire, that is, I'm sure, several weeks into months. And then what I would call phase two into the long-term peace agreement, that's into months, perhaps early into 2026. The diplomacy behind this, it's not easy. As I mentioned earlier, diplomacy is messy. I've negotiated with the Russians. They can be hard. They can be, in my view, untrustworthy. They will lie and steal and cheat as much as they possibly can. But what will hold their feet to the fire is making sure that they see that there's no more gain for them, essentially from Putin's standpoint, militarily on the battlefield, but also economically and financially. I believe that is a significant card that the United States and a unified Ukraine holds as those economic and financial cards that we have against Putin because his economy is not in a very good position. You'll at some point, perhaps you'll see some discontent with the Russian people if they're starting to feel those economic financial challenges that they felt, by the way, through decades, but even more so because of how much Putin has obligated to blood and treasure to this heinous attack, not only in 2022, but certainly all the way back to 2014.
Do you expect the U.S. to continue providing Ukraine with security assistance after the end or after the beginning of ceasefire?
I do, and I would advise President Trump not necessarily to keep what we call an open checkbook and so forth, but provide the necessary intelligence capabilities, intelligence sources, and to some degree military capabilities that Europe and the NATO forces can't provide. The United States provides exquisite, what we call enablers. That is very capable air defense for Ukraine, not necessarily to be offensive over the next several years, but defensive in order to protect its innocent men and women, as well as the fact that obviously a sovereign nation. And also, I would remind our viewers, there is another security guarantee that I understand has been now worked out between the United States and Ukraine is the mineral deal that can provide up to $500 billion of economic financial opportunity for the United States as well as for Ukraine. Sometimes there's nothing better than a very solid economic, financial, strong relationship between our two nations. I think will also lend itself for a security guarantee beyond military, but certain economically as well.
How do you see U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine? Because it seems like Trump's administration is unwilling to provide a backstop for British and French troops conducting this peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. How do you see the security guarantees?
I wouldn't necessarily use the term, perhaps unwilling may not be the right term, but what President Trump has done over the last couple of weeks is really compelled Europe, in this case the United Kingdom, France, and others, to provide actual boots on the ground as peacekeeping troops. In fact, the United Kingdom has offered up to 30,000 troops for peacekeeping forces on the ground for not only the ceasefire, but for the long-term peace agreement. That's a good thing, by the way. It shouldn't be just the United States going alone, but the United States leading in this case. I believe you'll find President Trump is still going to be willing to support NATO and lead NATO, but it's a different era right now, and that is compelling Europe to provide more than just, for instance, 2% of their gross domestic product, but perhaps up to 5% of their gross domestic product of building up their militaries. They no longer have a luxury, if you will, of the United States providing the overarching capabilities, which was what I would call an open checkbook. But nonetheless, President Trump's not walking away from NATO. He's not going to walk away from Europe. He's certainly not going to walk away from Ukraine. And I go back to that mineral agreement that he has now brought to bear and agreed with President Zelensky. Putin will see that. He'll see that as that what he thought was a glaring gap back on February 28th after the Oval Office discussions. He'll see now a closing of that gap significantly with U.S. leadership, as well as with President Zelensky, as well as Europeans, with that security agreement, that mineral security agreement, closing that gap in our relationship economically and financially. He'll also see the fact that you've got a stronger Europe that has been, that President Trump has compelled Europe to move forward with in terms of them providing their military capabilities and even boots on the ground to guard those borders, as well as in the event that it's negotiated to actually put European forces as peacekeeping forces to prevent Putin from breaking any type of agreement arrangement.
Also, there is another initiative, Sky Shield, over Ukraine. European experts are urging to conduct this air policing mission over Ukraine with more than 120 fighter jets from the United Kingdom and France to ensure Russia will not attack Ukraine again in the air. What is your reaction to such initiative in the air from European allies, and do you expect the US to play any kind of role in that?
Well, first and foremost, the United States has great experience in this with our efforts for Operation Northern Watch and Southern Watch after Desert Storm in the early 90s and through the 2000s. To do just that is to protect the air, but also prevent Iraqi forces from launching against the Kurds to the north and against other, perhaps as they viewed it, their adversaries. So understanding all that. I believe it's a very good step forward for Europe to come forward with this thought of of an air campaign, if you will, to protect sovereign Ukrainian airspace. And to not only guard but patrol that to prevent Russia from even thinking twice about attacking Ukraine. Like I mentioned, 250 drone attacks in the last couple of days, as well as ballistic missile attacks to prevent them. I think you'll still see United States, and I would advise the president to continue with providing Patriot missile batteries. Other enablers we can provide are air refueling capabilities, although there are some European air refueling capabilities. There are some command and control aircraft that could help with that arrangement of protecting the skies over Ukraine. But I do not predict, however, that you'll see actually United States Air Forces participating in that, nor United States boots on the ground in Ukraine. And I would advise the president not to do that. Let me also segue. It's not only the air and certainly the ground, but also from sea, to include the Black Sea. And you'll see strong U.S. but NATO participation protecting the Black Sea against any encroachment that Russia would have with their Black Sea naval forces from doing any harm in the Black Sea, certainly against Ukraine, but also against NATO forces as well.
Do you feel that European allies have enough air power to conduct such a large-scale mission over Ukraine and to deter Russia's another attack in the future?
It's not necessarily do they have enough air power in terms of aircraft, but are they able to and willing to sustain a long-term campaign, as we've talked about, not only over months, but over years. It was quite taxing on the United States when we did so, as I mentioned, in Operation Northern Watch and Southern Watch over Iraq, but we were still able to do so, almost going alone in that regard. But it's a tough chore, it's a tough mission, but it's also, I think, significant that Europe takes the lead on that because it shows Europe's commitment. It also shows them willing to deter and dissuade Putin from ever acting again in terms of attacking Ukraine or any other NATO member. But I think not only from a military standpoint, however, Daniel, but also it's showing its political obligation and its political stiffness and resolve to continue to compel Putin from acting again by, in this case, using military means to protect the skies over Ukraine.
But don't you think that U.S. Air Force participation in such mission could make this mission more credible and greater deterrent?
I think the credibility of the United States and certainly our air capability is the current capabilities that we have throughout Europe and our commitment to NATO. That's been decades long, and I would not advise the president, nor do I anticipate him making any changes to that. We've got significant air power in Europe. I recall back, I had the opportunity at the end of Operation Allied Force to command the bombers out of Fairford, England. That was a demonstration of U.S. capability against taking out Milosevic and so forth. So the demonstrated capabilities that the United States has, not only in our current force structure and positioning in Europe, but also our decades-old historical support of Europe and NATO, certainly to deter and dissuade back then Soviet Union or Russia from acting. And I think that that decades-old capability and the demonstrated capability that we have through not only the numbers of aircraft and the capabilities we have that include not only fighters and bombers, but also includes air command and control aircraft as well as tanker forces throughout the NATO region is significant enough to provide for and back up that what would be a European effort to protect the skies of Ukraine.
Thank you, General Newton, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, Daniel. Always good to be with you and look forward to chatting with you next time.